Today, we're diving into an incredible story called Deep Water. It was written by William O. Douglas, who, get this, was also a U.S. Supreme Court justice. It's a really profound look at how a person can stare their absolute deepest terror right in the face and win.
So let's just start with the big question that this whole story is built around. What does it actually take to conquer your deepest fear? I'm not talking about just learning to live with it, but to truly, completely overcome it. That's really the heart of what we're digging into here.
And we're going to see how it all plays out through the personal journey of William O. Douglas himself in his lifelong battle with something he just calls deep water, which, as you'll see, became a symbol for so much more than just a pool of water.
Now, to really get a grip on the kind of fear we're talking about, we have to go back, way back, because this whole thing didn't start at the swimming pool. It started much earlier.
When he was just 4 years old, he was at a beach in California with his dad. A wave knocked him flat and just rolled right over him. He was totally submerged, couldn't breathe. It was probably only for a second, but that was enough. That one moment planted this deep, deep seed of fear, a real understanding of how powerful and overwhelming water could be.
And that early experience really set the stage for the main event of the story, the misadventure, as he calls it, at the YMCA pool that would take that apprehension and turn it into pure, paralyzing terror.
So picture this. Douglas is at the pool, just trying to teach himself to swim by watching other kids. He's not ready, he can't really swim yet. And out of nowhere, this 18-year-old kid, probably just messing around, picks him up and just chucks him into the deep end, 9 feet. He said later that in that moment, 9 feet felt more like 90.
As he's sinking, his mind is actually pretty clear. He's got a plan. He'll hit the bottom, push off with all his might, and pop right back up to the surface like a cork. Simple, right? But that is not what happened. Not even close. The trip back up was painfully, agonizingly slow. His lungs felt like they were going to explode. When he finally did break the surface, it was just for a second, long enough to get a mouthful of water and start choking before he started sinking all over again.
And this right here is where simple fear becomes what Douglas calls terror. And that's a really important distinction for him. See, terror isn't just being scared. It's a complete psychological hijacking. Your rational mind just shuts down. You have no physical control. He says it's a mental handicap that really only people who have felt it can ever understand.
So he goes down a second time, and it's even worse. Slower. More traumatic. He said he felt paralyzed, like a huge jolt of electricity was freezing his limbs. It was like one of those nightmares where you're trying to fight something but you just can't move. He knew with absolute certainty that terror had completely taken over his body and his mind.
And then, on the third trip down, something changes. All the panic just disappears. This strange, sleepy peace washes over him. There was no more pain, no more fear. He just felt drowsy, like he was drifting off into what he called oblivion. He even compared the feeling to being held safe in his mother's arms. He was letting go.
And then, in his own unforgettable words, the curtain of life fell. He just blacked out. The fight was over. For all he knew, that was it.
Now, obviously, he was rescued, but surviving the drowning was really just the beginning of a much longer, harder battle. The battle with the consequences of that moment.
You see, this wasn't just a bad memory. That trauma became what he called a permanent mental handicap. For years after, just being near water would bring back that icy horror. It completely robbed him of all the joys of fishing or canoeing or just swimming with his friends. It made him feel like he was living a smaller, limited, inadequate life.
But William O. Douglas was not the kind of person to let fear win. And this is where his journey to fight back begins. And he does it in such a smart, methodical way.
He actually hired a swimming instructor who got it. He understood this was a psychological fight, not just a physical one. And his method was just brilliant. First, he put Douglas in a harness with a rope and pulley, so he could feel safe in the water. Then, he broke everything down into tiny pieces. First, just putting his face in the water. Then, learning to exhale underwater and inhale above it. And finally, one by one, mastering each part of the swimming stroke. It was a slow, 7-month process of rebuilding not just his skills, but his trust.
Okay, but being comfortable with an instructor holding the rope is one thing. Real victory? That meant he had to face the water completely alone.
So to finally conquer this thing, Douglas does something psychologically brilliant. He personifies his fear. He gives it a name, Mr. Terror. By turning this abstract feeling into a tangible enemy, he could actually confront it, he could talk to it, and in the end, he could defeat it in a head-to-head battle.
His final test had 2 parts, at 2 different lakes, and each one was a different kind of victory. The first was Lake Wentworth. Swimming across that lake was a test of his physical skill. It was proof that, yes, he had mastered the mechanics of swimming. But Warm Lake, that was the real final boss. It was more isolated, more intimidating. Conquering that lake wasn't about swimming technique. It was about proving to himself that he had achieved total psychological freedom, that he was finally truly free from fear.
So, after all of that, what's the big takeaway? Well, this entire ordeal gave him this incredibly profound insight into what fear and even death really are.
And this might be the most powerful realization he has. Because he'd experienced both, he knew the difference. He realized that death itself, that moment the curtain fell, was actually peaceful. It was just a quiet state of oblivion. The real enemy, the real monster, was the terror. It was the paralyzing fear of dying. He figured out that what we're all really afraid of isn't the end itself, but the agony of getting there.
And that brings us to those famous words from President Roosevelt, "All we have to fear is fear itself." Douglas's story is just such a powerful real-life example of this idea. He learned that the biggest monsters aren't out there in the world. They live inside our own minds. And by facing them down, we can conquer not just the water, but the very idea of fear itself. Which really just leaves one last question for all of us, doesn't it? What's your deep water?